Hey people, welcome back to a brand new episode of IDTALK4ED Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. If this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return back for future episodes and new content. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, I welcome you back and I hope that today's episode is one that you will find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So before we get to the main conversation, just a reminder for folks who are on YouTube, hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on episodes of Identity Talk for Educators Live and all of our other content through the Identity Talk platform. For those who are listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other audio platforms, you can subscribe there as well. We are all over these airwaves. And if you are someone that wants to send a donation to help us continue building this platform and bring in more phenomenal educators on, we do accept donations through Cash App and Venmo. So if you're a Cash App user, our handle is $ID Talk4ED. And if you are on Venmo, the handle is at Kwame SM, KWAMESM. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Today's episode is one that I think is going to be an important one for many of us. There's been a lot of conversation over the past few months about books, what books should be in our schools. Um, we've had books being banned in different schools within different states, and it's just an extension of all the anti-critical race theory narratives and propaganda that's being pushed throughout our country, and it's going beyond that as well. But I wanted to bring on somebody who knows quite a bit about books and what we need to look for when considering certain books to have in our classroom libraries, but also books that we should be reading and exposing our students to. So this woman is someone who is just phenomenal. She's a librarian, she's an activist, she's an educator, she's an advocate. She just holds so many roles, and I'm just honored to have her come on the podcast to talk with us about this very important issue. So I don't want to waste too much more time because I want to get right in. Without further ado, let's bring on Julia Torres to the podcast to talk with us about what's going on right now with all these books being banned and what we can do to get our libraries more reflective of the students that we serve in our classes. So let's bring her on to talk about that. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I do have my little annoying wiener dog. His name is Shorty. He's in the background. You may periodically hear him bark. I don't know what he's barking at. He is old, so the elder dogs, they have a little bit of a different wavelength. So please be patient with him and with me as you hear him in the background.
Listen, it is all good. On this podcast, we're not about perfectionism. So if we get a little dog bark in here, it's all good. It's not going to derail the conversation. I promise you that.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, I'm really excited to be here to talk about my favorite thing, which is books. I collect books, I read books, I promote books, I study books, I write books. Books are a real lifeline for me. And it is a real sense of joy or a real source of joy when I can help young folks find their way to a book that changes their lives as well.
And we'll be getting more into that as we get deeper into the conversation. But just to start things off, this is a question that I always love to ask my guests when they come on because this is really what the show is about. Your identity, who you are, and who you represent. So I want to ask you, what brought you into the education field, and also, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, so my grandmother was actually a principal and a superintendent of schools. She first worked at a school called Bishop Spencer Academy on the island of Bermuda. I don't know if it still exists, but she also did a lot of work with art therapy in the prison system in Bermuda. I've got family from all over the Caribbean and folks who live in South America and Central America. And there are many people in my family who are either educators themselves, or my grandfather was a notable social worker in Ohio. So lots of folks dedicated to public service. So that kind of piece, I think that I grew up around people who did public service. My mother is also a librarian, and so that I would say that just kind of came naturally to me. I started reading when I was about 3. Mom gave me books always. Those were always gifts. But then she also had an extensive in-home library that I enjoyed, and still enjoy to this day. She still sends me books from her in-home library today, which is kind of great. So then what brought me to this work? Well, I can tell you that I started off as a para. I was actually a para in a special ed class. And I felt something really unique during my time as a para. I really enjoyed it. I loved working with young people. And I decided that I wanted to see about what it would take to get a master's in education. I already had a bachelor's in English, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I thought maybe I would be a reporter. Investigative reporting always intrigued me. I have so much respect for Nicole Hannah Jones. I want to shout her out for the work that she has done. And creative writing has always been a part of my life since I was very small. I've always written poetry, always done that. So I thought, you know what? Let's just see if I'd be any good at teaching. And the first time I taught a class, it was an 8th grade language arts class. And I remember stepping outside the room and just bursting into tears because I felt so strongly that teaching was what I was supposed to do. So from teaching, which I did roughly until 2017, perhaps the spring of 2018, when I was called to serve as a librarian on campus because we had no library, and they were able to shame, for lack of a better way of saying it, shame the public into making sure that the Montbello kids got their library back. And I was asked to be the librarian. So that was an honor. And then they took it away. So just barely in October of 2020, I was informed that the new principal of the new unified Montbello High School has decided that she wants a para instead of a teacher for librarian. So the good news is that the para that they've chosen is actually a graduate of the system. So he is an alumni who's coming back in. And that's actually really exciting. And I like that he's male as well because it's a female dominated field. I am teaching 10th grade language arts at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Early College, which is just down the street from the Montbello campus. So that's where things are.
Wow. And are you still doing librarian work as well, or just strictly teaching?
Right now, my official work is teaching 10th grade English, but outside of that, I'm actually keynoting a librarian conference in April, I believe, in Minneapolis, and doing a workshop in Syracuse, New York for librarians. I'm doing a lot of work with Minneapolis Public Schools with their library system. And so I continuously do work with librarians. I have a book coming out in May, co-authored with another librarian. Her name is Valerie Tago. It's called Liven Up Your Library, Design Engaging and Inclusive Programming for Tweens and Teens, and it is going to be published by ISTE Publications. So I'm very excited about the implications for that within the United States. But I really like the idea that ISTE is the International Society for Technology and Education. So I'm hopeful that Valerie and I will be able to do some work with librarians and with educators overseas, because travel is a big passion of mine. We'll talk more about that later. But I'm very excited about the international implications that this book could have for just talking about that middle space between language arts and librarianship. And then where does advocacy play into all of that? That's basically what the book is about.
All right, this is interesting because you have a dual threat here. You have a language arts educator, and a librarian. That's just dope. So I want to focus on that for a little bit. So how does your expertise as a librarian help to enhance your craft as a language arts teacher, or vice versa? Because I'm sure it impacts both of your roles.
I would say that my librarian expertise helps me because I'm able to know the books that young people gravitate toward. I'm a very good book recommender at this point. One of the things that people don't realize librarians are very experienced with and knowledgeable about is the organization of information. So it's not just helping young folks find fiction or nonfiction texts that will intrigue them or spark their curiosity. It is also the organization of information, which includes critical research studies. So learning how to process information in our society. That sounds dry to some people, but one of the things that I think we are lacking in our society is that ability to critically evaluate the many pieces of information that are coming at us constantly. So, what I love to be able to do is help young people identify their own biases, but then also to look at information as a source of power. Is someone going to have power over you, or are you going to receive information and incorporate it into your personal power, the way that you show up in the world? And then the way that you operate.
And speaking on critical evaluation of information, and I'm thinking about librarian training programs. So there's a lot of talk about book audits, making sure that we are identifying problematic narratives, problematic stereotypes that dehumanize different groups of people um, across the internet intersectional spectrum. Now, I'm wondering, is this something that is becoming more of a focus in librarian training programs, to your knowledge, um, or is this something that's still evolving?
It's still evolving. I have one class that I know of that everyone's required, or that's actually an elective that you can take in library studies, which is about equity in librarianship. The majority of librarians, including school librarians, identify as white and then identify as white monolingual English speaking. That's globally. So the good news is that library studies is everywhere. So there are library studies in Central and South America that are very unique to those places. There are library studies within the African continent that are very specific to various areas. The bad news is that the colonization piece of taking, I would say Western Europeans have a very established pattern of taking their studies or their learning or understanding of a particular subject area, in this case, library studies, and making it seem like it is superior or the only one or the best. And so that's where we get Dewey Decimal, which we know that last name Dewey, John Dewey, was somebody of Western European descent, took that all over the world. And then that's the way that folks organize their library collections. However, there's a dope librarian and literacy champion. Her name is No Name. And she has come up with what's called a radical hood library, which I think is so cool. It's in Los Angeles, and it's a way of cataloging content for library materials that is applicable to the folks in her community. So it's very specialized to the folks in her community. So the Radical Hood Library actually has a section on Black radical thought. It has a section on prison writings. It is so dope and so customized to the needs of the people in that particular space. On the other side, there are indigenous librarians who have completely different ways of classifying information. One way that I've discovered that is very impressive to me is that they classify information by its relevance to the library user population. So if you are looking for a job, or if you are somebody who is looking to learn skills that are actually going to be useful to you in the job force, then they classify information by its usefulness to the population. So librarians are starting to sort of change the way that they look at organization of information to adapt to the needs of the library users in whatever community they're in. With that said, we know that there's some very disturbing things happening in Texas, in various other states in the United States, and probably globally, where people are going to board meetings and they are saying this book should not be in the library. These classroom libraries are off limits until we have censored them. They are taking away the young person's right to choose what they want to read. Mostly because they themselves as adults are uncomfortable having conversations with young people. And I find that so ironic because most of us don't really take a moment to think about what's on TikTok, openly accessible, what's on Wikipedia, openly accessible, what is on Snapchat, openly
Yep.
accessible, what is on Instagram, openly accessible. So, like, how dare you try to come into an intellectual space, a space where good things could happen, and ban books when the content that young people are exposed to and opting in to be exposed to is all over all the streaming networks as well, all over the streaming networks. I don't see anyone trying to censor Netflix, which is wild to me, you know?
No, it's super wild. And I know with regard to this ban books movement, obviously there's a lot of focus on the students and them not being able to have access to books that reflect who they are authentically. But the other side of it too is from a librarian perspective, this controversy is taking away the agency that you have as a librarian because you're the one that makes these executive decisions about what books students should be reading, what books should teachers be recommending to students. That's part of the role of the librarian. And now you have politicians taking away some of that thunder.
One of the things that we talk about in our book is a way to get young people involved in the process of text selection and incorporation into the collection. So,
Mhm.
yes, I am the person who controls the money. Ultimately, I'm the person who allocates the funds. I'll write a grant, I'll get the money, then I can decide what to spend it on. Also, the district, since it was a school library, the district is the one that would tell me what money to spend in various places, and they would really support my choices as well. But there are people whose entire job is to be knowledgeable about books that would be appropriate for different library user populations depending on their demographics. So one of the things that I believe in pretty firmly is that young people should always be included in every aspect of their education. So when you have adults saying, I don't feel like these books should be in the library or available for young people, I think that that is really bold because the adults are not the ones that actually are in the school, reading the books, experiencing the education. You're making this decision on behalf of someone else with the excuse that you are protecting them. That's the guys, right? That's always what they say. I am protecting them. But what happens when somebody is 19, 20 years old and they go out into the world and this is the first time that they're hearing of the existence of a certain way of being
Mhm.
or events that happen? Typically, what happens? Fear, bigotry, violence,
Yes,
right?
for
So
sure.
we have the opportunity to not go that route, and people are still not choosing it, which is really disappointing.
No, they aren't because they recognize that by maintaining this dominance, it allows them to still continue to preserve power. This is
Right,
a power struggle, pretty much. This is about
right.
maintaining power. Every move that's being made, um, unfortunately, at the expense of so many individuals, most importantly, our students and young people.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back for a little bit because obviously we don't start off questioning what we read. For many of us, it's not until a little later in life that we start to realize how problematic some of the books we read growing up are. So I want to know from you, at what point did you start to interrogate the content from the books you read as a child and start to analyze them through a anti-bias, anti-racist lens?
I'll be honest, I was an adult. I was an adult when I had to teach To Kill a Mockingbird. And I looked at it, and the first thing that happened with To Kill a Mockingbird, I was teaching it in the mostly white suburbs. And the first thing that happened was folks asking me, Miss Torres, when is this going to get exciting? This
Mm.
book is not, this is drawing on and on and on. There is so much expedition, or no, exposition. Sorry, not expedition. There's so much exposition and so much, how can I say this? Oh, it's going to offend a lot of people if I say verbosity. So I will just say that there is a lot of exposition that takes a very long time to say some pretty simple things. Now, keep in mind, the world we are living in now is very fast paced. And I want to take this time to shout out an amazing graphic novel called Decelerate Blue, which I think is so interesting. So check it out if you have time. But we are living in a world where our young folks are accessing content so quickly. You know that TikTok, the whole premise of that is that the videos are going to be just quick and that people are going to digest them quickly. Part of the premise of Netflix is that you're going to lose track of time. You'll be watching a show, an episode, and it'll just roll right into the next episode. Part of the premise of all of these streaming networks is that you're going to lose track of time and get completely lost in entertainment. And when it comes down to the consumption of information, things are not very different. So my critical evaluation of information didn't happen until I was older, but I also did not have all of the access to all of the different devices and streaming networks and stuff that our young people have access to these days. So, being a mother of two teenagers myself, I've seen a vast difference in their ability to critically evaluate what they're presented with. And that's part of what my skills are as a mother, as a teacher, and then as a librarian, is to help folks understand that there is always an agenda, especially if it's coming from a .com. There is always an agenda. We live in a corporatized world and society. So we got to think about what that agenda is, and then what's your part that you play in either dismantling or perpetuating this status quo.
And you're touching on digital literacy, which I know you talk a lot about. And just to add on to what you're saying about just short form material on social media and other platforms, um, I believe that with all the policing going on around just books, hardback books, paper copy books, I believe it's led to more of an emergence um, of digital literacy. So, do you believe that we're going to see um, not just more educators, but just more authors really taking more advantage of the social media platforms to expose the stories and present them to this Gen Z audience that we have?
I think anybody who feels that they can exploit the Gen Z audience either for attention or commercial gain, is they're going to do it. That's the sad piece. That's what I have seen.
Yeah, because you can't police everything.
No.
Like they can't, which is more of a reason to continue to write, continue to present, continue to reveal, all these different truths that are
And
in these books.
helping young people see that they do have the power within themselves to recognize when something feels off. Trust your inner compass. Trust your ability to recognize when something is helpful versus harmful.
And I think that's the key. And this is something that Dr. Goli Muhammad talks about in Cultivating Genius, just this idea of helping students build the sense of criticality when they do observe information, being able to interrogate, being able to come up with their own perspectives on what they're reading, the different sources they're getting information from, and all these different things. So we got to build that criticality agency within our students so that we don't have to be the ones to always reveal what is problematic. They have that ability to do it on their own.
And I've seen them do that. So, I work with older young people. So I definitely have seen it, but they're also at an age that relies so much on social approval. The high schoolers that I work with are at an age where their part of their brain that relies on social approval is very much active and exploited by those who create social media. So trying to get them to be a little bit more aware of that it's an interesting challenge. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Muhammad. I've been fortunate enough to be doing some work with her over the last few months and into the next few months. And I'm a huge admirer and I'm a believer in the pursuits. And one of the pursuits that I think is perhaps somewhat underrated, but so important, is that it is a culturally and historically responsive education. So we look at the lessons from history so that
Mm,
we recognize we are not the first to be trying to dismantle some of these systems. We are not the first to ask these critical questions. We are just living in an age where we have access to so much and where people are constantly mining our lives for data that they can use to, I don't want to be too cynical here, but I feel like the majority of the mining of data is for exploitative reasons. I don't know that it's for helpful reasons. So I'm hoping that that will change as our young people come up and they've grown up in the age of technology, they've seen the bad consequences, and they want to make a better world for themselves and the next generations.
right. And it's historically responsive in the sense that a lot of these books that are being banned do provide a blueprint to our liberation.
Amen.
And
Hmm.
that's something that a lot of the politicians, primarily right wingers, conservatives, even some of our so called liberal progressive Democrats, they know
Hmm.
that there are answers in those books, which is why they're trying to cut the access off, you
Right.
know. So that's something that we have to be aware of as well. But I want to talk about disrupt text,
Mm.
which is something that you play a heavy role in, along with good friend of mine, Dr. Kim Parker, and many others. So I want you to talk to me about how it came about and what is the ultimate mission of Disrupt Text. And please, and please share all the other co-conspirators who are part of this, because it's not just you, it's other people. It's a team
It's
effort.
so many.
So
There's
many.
so many. Yeah. So I mean, Dr. Kim Parker, myself, Lorena Herman, and Trisha Abarvia, all four of us came together because we had been doing similar work in our own different environments. Dr. Parker is in Boston. Lorena at the time was at an independent school in Austin, Texas. I'm here in Denver Public Schools. And Trisha Abarvia is outside of Philadelphia in a suburb. And so we had very different environments, but we were all kind of trying to work towards the same goal, which is, as you mentioned, liberation for young folks so that they're not out here forced to fake read books that are not actually doing much to advance their concepts of their own personal power as writers, as creators, as storytellers, all of that. So, one of the things that I am grateful for in terms of disrupt text is that we each have different strengths. We have some of the same ones, but we each have very different strengths. So I learned from Dr. Parker about what it means to be a part to tangentially be a part of a university system like Harvard. I learned from Trisha Abarvia what it's like to be in an independent school that is, I think her new school is so beautiful. It's Quaker and it has an even distribution of students identifying as Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and white students, which that's something that would be amazing to me to see a
Mhm.
school that had an even distribution there. I've mostly worked in segregated schools my entire career. And then Lorena right now is building this incredible empire with Multicultural Classroom and working on developing a whole lot of connections through various work that she's doing with other organizations and entities as well. Heinemann being one of them, the publisher of her book. So, what is Disrupt Text? Yes, it's the four of us, but really it's everyone else who is doing this work. I think we get caught up in thinking about, Julia, Kim, Lorena, and Trisha as these four who are out here doing all this stuff. But really, it comes down to what you're willing to do in your classroom, in your community, with your set of restrictions, whether you are free to pick all of your books or you have folks telling you this is what you have to teach. So I love the beauty of Disrupt Text is it is very much a crowdsourced, grassroots type of organization. And I like that there's a focus on teaching with the books that we love so much, not just relegating them to choice reads that folks can read if they want to. Because for the longest time, books that were written by BIPOC authors, just like many of these behind me, they would have been relegated to the book club choice. Whereas people take seriously the books like The Great Gatsby, Romeo and Juliet, Huck Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, and you're seeing that there's a similarity between all of those. So that's the brunt of our work, is to dismantle some thinking around that and give folks other options.
Wow. And that's something that we gotta continue to do, for sure. And you're mentioning Lorena's book. So it's Textured Teaching, y'all. Make sure y'all get that book, Textured Teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Dr. Kim has another one coming out as well from ASCD. That one will be out next month, I think.
Yes.
And it's called Literacy as Liberation.
Yes. Shout out to Dr. Kim's good friend of mine, Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So I know her pretty well. But yeah,
Cool.
y'all doing some phenomenal work. Um,
Thank you.
so you were mentioning your book that you co-authored, Liven
Mm-hmm.
Up Your Library. So
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked a little bit about what teachers can do, but this is not just a book for teachers, it's also a book for librarians as well. So can you just tell us a little bit about the book, the whole process of writing it, and what lessons do you hope that people can gain from reading this book?
I'm typing the title of the book into the chat for you. I think I got it right. We had to hyphenate the title. So if you put Liven Up Your Library, Julia E. Torres, and Valerie Tago is my co-author, then you will find the information about the book. It's design engaging and inclusive programming for tweens and teens. Um, and the main thing is, we came together because Valerie had this book that she had contracted with ISTE to write, and she needed a partner, a co-author who was in the field. And she's in the field as well. Valerie is a librarian, a school librarian right now. So we're both practitioners. So you will definitely hear the practitioner voice. What we did not want to do is have another research heavy text. We do have a lot of outside references. So it's divided into several different chapters. I think there are 5 chapters, and we have very practical pieces for folks to be able to apply the theoretical work of librarianship to the work that they're doing practically in school libraries. It's primarily for school librarians, but it's also because we noticed a trend. There is a report right now called the Slide Report.
Hmm.
You can go to libslide.org, I think it is, libslide.org, and it will talk to you about the trend toward letting go or letting teacher librarians retire and replacing them with para librarians. So there's a gap there between folks who have knowledge of library and information science with folks who have been hired to staff a library and circulate books. So our book really just kind of is the middle ground between that. We're trying to help folks understand that library and information science is actually a science, and there's a lot that goes into it. But here's how we're going to help you take the best parts of it, or the parts that are most applicable to your work in the library, and at the same time, make library programming more engaging and equitable for all students. So that's the premise.
So a para librarian is someone whose main role is to just circulate books.
Right. Right. Some go above and beyond, some do not. It very much depends on, you know, a lot of different factors. But I think that what's exciting about this book is that it's part of a series called Empowered Librarians from ISTE. So we will absolutely be doing a book club around this book and trying to just give some professional development to help folks understand what it might mean. You don't necessarily have to get your LIS or your MLIS in order to serve young people, but here's what you're missing. So we'll kind of make it interesting for them. And then for the folks who already have the MLIS, many people got theirs in the 80s or the 90s or the early O's. So
Yeah.
much has
Lots
changed.
of change.
Lots has changed. So in this book, the appeal for folks who already have the MLIS is that we have updated a lot of the information with how to teach young folks these days, especially with regard to like critical evaluation of media sources and things like that.
And this may be a curveball, but I think it's something that we should bring up. So there's conversation around the hegemony of English, particularly within our school communities. And I want to try to intersect it with the importance of just having books, representative books within our schools. So, you're multilingual, you speak multiple languages, so you obviously know the value of having those different linguistic identities. What I'm curious to know is, how does translanguaging practices factor in to the work that you do as a librarian, particularly with our emerging bilinguals in our school communities?
So the assumption is that a lot of folks are Spanish speaking, and I speak Spanish and Portuguese fluently. I was raised speaking Spanish, and then I learned Portuguese a bit later. But many of my multilingual and bilingual students actually speak Arabic, Amharic, Farsi, Marshallese, these languages that I do not know at all.
Right.
So my skill set goes to finding the books that will connect with them that are either in English, but with characters that represent their lived experiences or are in their mother tongues. So that's a lot of the work that I do, is trying to get in touch with librarians and other sources of materials that are outside of the United States so that I can bring them in. You wouldn't believe the look on one of my students' faces. She was Marshallese, and I told her that I did actually have books in Marshallese. Her face,
Wow.
that's the type of thing that you really want to continue to do. So being aware of the fact that the idea of literacies does not end with Spanish and English, because I think we all know that this is my cat. I apologize. He's always going to make himself known. He's very handsome. Yes, we know.
Ah,
So
kitty.
he likes to be seen. So part of what happens, at least in the western part of the United States, you may already know that this was where I am. Colorado was part of Mexico for a very long time,
Hmm.
into the 1800s. So then we've got like Louisiana that went back and forth between being a Spanish territory and belonging to France. So that's why they speak Creole, and they've got plenty of folks who speak French, but you'll see some of the signage in New Orleans in Spanish. Then you've got your folks who are Haitian Creole, who speak Haitian Creole, which is a mix of all kinds of languages. So one of the things that I think we can do a better job of is just knowing the history of this land when it comes to colonization and when it comes to the languages of colonization, respecting the literacies that exist among Indigenous people that might not always be printed text on a page, but often include oral storytelling traditions, respecting and honoring those. And then recognizing, particularly when it comes to Blackness, that the Black diaspora is big, and there are Black people everywhere, people of African descent everywhere. And along the way, they may have picked up different parts of languages or food traditions or various things. So let's honor that. Let's not assume that because someone looks a certain way or shows up in the world a certain way, then we can, humans do that in order to feel safe, I think. But if we can remain curious and remain open rather than, you know, if something is unfamiliar, we become afraid and hostile. I think that that's a better way to show up in this world.
Yes, disrupting that binary thinking that happens with English and Spanish is critical, but also recognizing just how expansive the literacies are. So when you go to Africa, you have griots,
Mhm.
right? But
Yeah,
guess what? Griots are here in the States. They're just in the
yeah.
form of spoken word artists. They're hip hop artists. They're rappers. But we don't recognize them as griots because of the narratives that we put in place. Ooh, wait, put
This
that book up again. I'm trying to
this is
get
a
the
new
title.
book from Jason Reynolds and his white friend Jason Griffin. Okay, so two people from two sides of life came together to do this virtual narrative, this visual narrative called Ain't Bird All the Bright. And when you were talking about griot, that's what this is. Essentially, this is
What?
a visual story about what it is to stay alive during the pandemic. It is
Wow.
artistic, it is different, And so, what we want to do is encourage our young folks to find the griot within themselves. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what it's about. And it's not just about writing it down. Like it's about how you want to present it, how you want to express yourself. And I think that's really the key to getting our young people to self advocate, but also to be vocal about the things that impact them.
Hmm.
No, we don't want to limit that their ability to do that.
Right. And they love hip hop. Many of our young people love hip hop and rap. That's also another place where griots are found. So let's recognize that and find a way to include that rather than relegating it to, okay, well, we're going to recognize that you like this and just kind of have this be your thing that you do on the side for fun. But that's not real education. That's not worthy of academic study, which is such erroneous and harmful and really emotionally violent thinking.
Yes, it is. All right. I want to go way back. So I know in the beginning, we talked a little bit about your upbringing and how you got to where you are as an educator, as a librarian. But I know that you personally spent a lot of time living in Brazil. And that's actually a place where my wife and I want to go. We have not yet touched South America. That's a continent we have yet to touch, but I think we've touched all the other ones, with the exception of probably Antarctica, which I'll never go
Mhm.
to. It's just too cold.
I hear
um,
you.
but I think we've touched all the other continents. But yeah, I'll confirm that later. But anyway, I'm interested in knowing, how did growing up in Brazil, spending all those years there, shape your identity and worldview as a black woman?
So, primeiro, se tem gente que estão escutando que falam português, só quero dizer que eu estou aqui continuando meus estudos em português e morando aqui em Colorado, que tem uma população de povo brasileiro que eu conheço e com quem eu trabalho de vez em quando. E é muito importante para a gente conectar com o pessoal do outro lado do mundo. So I said, it's really important for us to stay in touch with people on the other side of the world. And I still have contact with folks here, even in Colorado. There is a community of folks who are Brazilian that I stay connected to. So that's really important to me, is to stay connected to folks with whom you understand and who understand you, who know where you're coming from. So that's very important to me. I will say that the region in Brazil where I lived is Fortaleza. I'm not a huge fan of Recife, which is where Paulo Freire was closest to. I'm sure you've heard of Pedagogy of the Oppressed,
Oh
and
yes, one of
lots
my
lots of
favorites.
people have. Oh yeah, same. Paulo Freire, he and Bell Hooks were actually contemporaries, and I liked it. In my mind, they were homies, you know. But what's beautiful about the northeast region of Brazil is that that place is known for protest, for standing up against injustice. And many people don't know this, but when slaves were first brought from Africa, from West Africa to Brazil, they were brought to a place in Bahia where I actually went and spent some time, and it's very emotional, which I imagine Ghana, a similar energy, right? You feel that gravity, that weight
Yes.
of those people who were brought there and their whole lives changed or ended, you know. So that was, if you made it across the Atlantic, that was a very, very moving, emotionally stirring place to go. I can also say that there is anti-blackness in Brazil because it was colonized by the Portuguese. What's interesting though is that Brazilian racial mixing, I really dislike that language, but that's what I have. So we use the words we have to work with what we got. But anyway, Brazilian racial mixing followed very different patterns from here in the United States. Here in the United States, you had slave masters who would own people, and the enslaved would become their property. They often would have children who would then be slaves. In Brazil, the notion was to lighten everybody up. So when they were reproducing, which is such a gentle word, but there was a lot of sexual violence, I'm assuming, and there was a lot of mixing that went on with people. So the idea was that, you know, and even you can see it today, many Brazilians are the same color. Whereas here in the United States, we still have so much segregation because there was miscegenation laws, there was Jim Crow laws, we know about the loving family,
Yep.
you know, it just followed different paths. Whereas over there, the idea was, well, we're going to, which is still racist, we're going to make everybody improved by lightening them up. And so there was encouragement to go out and you know, the white colonizers from Portugal to go out and spread as much as you can. So, you know, I don't even want to say unfortunately, but tragically, South American and Brazilian indigenous people were pushed toward the Amazon more and more. And, you know, things just really followed a different trajectory in Brazil than they did here in the United States. And that's always fascinating to me. In a dream world, I would be able to get the funds to have a library in Cabo Verde, which is Cape Verde, I think, and another one in Bahia, and they would be sister libraries. And so there would be the curation, collection, and dissemination of information and knowledge production among Black people on both sides of the Atlantic. What did it look like? What was the history of it? Who were the griots? You know, who was creating the stories? Who was preserving the stories of these people? There's a beautiful place in Rio called Pedra do Sal, which is in English, it's Salt Rock. And that is the place where the slaves would go and do their laundry. And if you go, you can still see little like indentations in the rocks where people would beat their laundry to get the water out of it. That's the
Wow.
birthplace of samba. It has such a spiritual resonance. And I don't know that this is happening now, but pre-COVID, you could go every Friday night and there was a huge group of folks, everyone just sings samba. And it's like one of the most, I would say, favored places to go for sure in Rio for me.
Oof. Oh, we got to book a trip there. My wife and I, we have to.
Yeah,
We were
if
trying
you
to do
do.
that. We were trying to do that for our honeymoon, but then that was around the time that the Olympics were happening, and then you had all the controversy swirling at that time. So
If you
yeah,
do go, as a Black person, I recommend Bahia just because I feel like it's so deeply Black. Like there are places in Rio where you can feel it too,
okay.
just like I was describing to you about the Pedro do Sal. But if you go to Bahia, there's a saying in Brazil, Bahia tem tudo que eu preciso, which means the state of Bahia has everything I need in life to be happy. That's basically the translation. Tudo que eu preciso. It has food, it's got the people, it's got the beaches, everything that you need. And it is true. I am here to testify to you. And anybody Brazilian, if you are listening to this, você sabe que é verdade também. Brazil has everything you need to be happy, and Bahia in particular, especialmente. I'm starting to mix everything now, but yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to keep all of that in mind for sure. And you may have to be my virtual tour guide.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I took a group of students there in 2015. I took 10 students from Montbello to Rio, and we had an amazing time. It was incredible.
Awesome. Awesome. Man, but we've had a pretty good conversation and we can go on, honestly, for hours. But I want to wrap things up with our lightning round. So
Yeah.
this is just an opportunity for the audience to get to know a little bit more about you outside of the library, outside the classroom, outside of all the important work you do for so many people and in service of so many people. So first question I want to ask you is what are you doing these days for self-care? How do you maintain your sanity and preserve yourself as you go through this work?
Kwame, so many things. So many things. I just answered a Twitter thread where I like listed off so many things. There's a company called Paragon Elixirs. I'll put it into the chat. I
Okay.
hope that folks will give this company a chance. They have an elixir called this is ancient Chinese medicine. It is called longevity. It's a longevity tonic,
Okay.
and I put a few drops of that into my juice every morning. Brazilians are very famous for making, I think all tropical people make like homemade juice is really important. So, dropping the Paragon Elixirs longevity serum into some homemade juice is a little tradition that I have that I really like. And then I would say reading for pleasure when I can steal time to do that. That's really important to me. Right now, I'm reading a comic series that has won a lot of awards, but it is heavy on the violence and heavy on the sexuality. So it's not for folks who are not ready to have conversations about what's in there. But it for adults, it is absolutely beautiful. You can look it up. It's called Saga. So I'm reading that. Sorry, it's by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, who are also award-winning artists and comic writers. So it's no joke. Saga is phenomenal. And then I am I watch Station 11 with my daughter. She's really into it. So that's been interesting. I try to take walks when I can. I'm a big animal lover. So I've got 3 cats and a dog. So I'm a big believer in animal snuggles. And, those are regenerative, I would say. Um, what else do I do? What else do I do? Don't be afraid to go to bed early. You know, if
Mm.
you're feeling off and it's 7:30, who cares? Just go to bed. It's okay.
Still working on that.
It's okay. So,
Still working on
well,
that.
I don't have small children. So let me add the caveat that I know what it's like. If you do have small children, it can be different.
Oh no,
Um,
I can't even make that an excuse. My son is asleep at 7 o'clock every
okay.
night or most
Okay.
nights. So I can't even use him as an excuse. He's 4.
Yeah.
I just have to combat that toxic productivity bug that's
Yeah.
within me. That's just
Yeah.
all that is for me.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, tonight I was supposed to work on some edits for my book. I was supposed to talk with another person about a project that we're doing together. I was supposed to do some library stuff. And I didn't do any of it. Instead, I attended a virtual birthday party for a very dear friend of mine who I love, Jose Wilson. And
Oh, shout out Jose.
yeah, that was dope. And I enjoyed a nice glass of wine. That makes me happy. Um, so I'm planning my trip to Portugal. That makes me happy too. And I know that's from a place of privilege, but there are places within the US that you can go to that I think are regenerative. I was very blessed to be able to take a girls' trip to Sedona in the fall, and that was really healing. So I recommend, I know an educator named Julie G. She's on social media. You can find her. She doesn't necessarily like a lot of attention, but she lives a type of life that I think is very inspiring because she has a good balance between being there for other people and working and always connecting back to nature and
Mm.
having family time. So I look at her as an example for sure.
Yeah. So that's a lot right there. And I could definitely relate to the book. I'm actually working on my manuscript. So I'm supposed to be writing this book for Heinemann. So I just signed that
Oh,
deal
good.
like last month. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you so much. So I'm actually
Congrats.
in the
That's
process
dope.
of doing that. Very early stages. Just talked with the editor and I just said, man, this is a beast right here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
gotta get going. I've had writer's block for like 3 weeks, right? And
I
counting.
set
So
my goal of no more than 1,000 words a day. I can do 1,500, sometimes 2,000, but for me, it's better when I just do chunks like that.
yeah. I think in my case, and maybe this is just how my brain works, I have to get the format down before I could write. You know what I'm saying? Like
An
if I
outline
have
is
the structure
helpful.
down, the skeleton down, as far as how I
Mm-hmm.
want to structure the chapters
Mm-hmm. An
and how I
outline is
want
helpful.
to lay it out, I could just write freely. That's how I
Yes.
wanted to do it ideally, but I'm starting to realize that there's going to be some detours to this process that I need to be prepared for. So I'm already feeling it early on.
That's okay. You just take things one step and one day at a time. Be gentle with yourself. Be easy.
All right, for sure. All right, I have one more question before we wrap up. Give me 3 influential figures, dead or alive, that you'd like to invite to dinner. Um,
Malcolm X, which may sound very stereotypical, but that's where I am.
hey, all right.
Um, Sandra Cisneros, Julia Alvarez, and I can I pick one more, Audrey Lorde.
Sure.
Audrey Lorde, I just think we got to talk about a lot of things.
Mm, mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a powerful
I love
table
her.
right there. Powerful table. Yes. But Julia, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome. Was
Yes.
really looking forward to it, and it has gone beyond my expectations.
I'm so glad. And I'm so honored that you would ask me to be your guest. And I wish you well. I'm always here for you. If you need anything, just reach out. I'm only an email away. And I look forward to supporting your work in whatever way that I can.
Yes. And before you go, please let people know how they can connect with you on social media and just really support the great work that you're doing.
You can find me on most social media at Julia Aaron 80. And you can find me, my website is just juliaetorres.com.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
And people, for those that want to pre-order a copy of her new book, Liven Up Your Library, Design Engaging and Inclusive Programming for Tween and Teens.
Yep.
Um, Make sure you go to her website, juliaetorres.com. And that should be coming out soon, correct?
Yes, it'll be out in May.
All
There is
right.
a link to the pre-order on the second page of my website. If you just go to work, it's at the very top. You can just click it right there. And I support and appreciate all pre-orders, especially those of the district size. So just let me know whatever if I can be of help navigating you to the book. And I should mention too, it is part of a series. So there are other librarians that are in
Ooh,
this series as well.
nice.
I want to support their work just as they support mine. So it's called Empowered Libraries from ISTE.
So Empowered Libraries is the name of the series that the book
Yes.
is under.
Right.
All right, good to know. So let's support our librarians, people. Let's support them.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for having me. This has
Yes,
been great.
awesome. And
Take good
hopefully we'll
care.
do this again soon.
Yeah, I'd love to. Take good care.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye. All right, y'all. So we're about to end another episode of I Dang Talk for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.